I just don't think that you need to bring in the questioning of the self. They're asking you to pick up a tool which can break down. It's a hammer so fucking big, it can smash everything. Everything. The sense of self, the sense of everything outside the entire universe. It's a fucking massive hammer. And they're asking you to use that to break apart a little thought. And you can break apart your little thoughts and feelings and beliefs. I mean, it sounds hard. I mean, people think, well, you can change your beliefs and sense of self, but you can do that quite easily by just challenging it, which is what a part of cognitive behavioural therapy. Firstly, welcome to this Thursday's talk, which is part 2 of last Thursday's talk, which was the acceptance and commitment therapy versus Buddhism, awakening versus good mental health. And we've done the comparison with Buddhism. We're going to look more at good mental health versus awakening. And we have one tiny drawback, or I do, which is I don't consider myself to have the best mental health, particularly at the moment, and I'm not awakened. So there's a little a little introduction there to the fact that this is going to be an interesting subject to explore. I don't know how many people who watch this will consider themselves either with perfect mental health or enlightened. If you do, and you can pick me up on any points, do. As far as I'm concerned, we're all looking at this from the perspective of setting a goal, really. So if we were to walk on the path of trying to improve our mental health or spiritually, it's a good idea at the outset to kind of make a hypothesis of what we're doing and why. Because then if you try something and you think that it was supposed to have a certain outcome and it doesn't have that outcome, then perhaps there was an erroneous assumption before that. So a lot of spirituality paths have to do with our assumptions and beliefs, which are inaccurate with the real world. So there's a good chance that where we start on the path is already based on a wrong assumption and a wrong belief. So to move in the correct direction, we actually have to go backwards from there, but that's our start point. So how can you go backwards from there? And identifying what the goal is, identifying what we're doing and why. Then if it doesn't work, or if we kind of start coming close but not quite close enough, at least then we know where we started from, and we can look at what were the assumptions in that original starting point, and take the next further step. With that in mind, last week we watched the acceptance and commitment therapy, the ACT Hexaflex video from Nesh Nikolic on his YouTube channel. He has a whole playlist talking about ACT therapy and the different, what would you call them, tools perhaps, or examples, metaphors, which therapists might use. Is directed, I'm sure, at therapists to help them learn and understand ACT. But for people like us, that's an incredible resource to have access to, and free access to at that. So if anyone's interested, check out his channel. It seems pretty good to me. I mean, I never trust a single source. I don't know him. I don't know about the qualifications or that type of thing. But from a layman's point of view, it looks like an incredible resource. Always good to cross-reference it with other sources as well, I'm sure. So where we left that video was that he was just about to jump into the goal of the Hexaflex. So we're going to jump into that as a start point for this talk today.
And
right.
so that's the
somewhere.
6 processes in this model.
Here we go.
And what that produces in the very, very middle is psychological flexibility. It's a big word, and there's a lot that we can go and unpack and kind of consider about what that means. But psychological flexibility is really about us being able to move around these 6 processes in a flexible way, rather than holding any of these processes tightly and rigidly. We ask that we hold them gently. And so what this might look like in an example might be, let's take a young boy who might be concerned that socially he's inept or not good enough, and that he's embarrassing and just doesn't kind of fit in. What we would probably find is this young lad, from an experiential acceptance point of view, would be probably avoidant of social situations, not wanting to go out and socialise. Or if he's able to even get there, he might be avoidant of going out and contributing to a social engagement. He might be fused with thoughts that he's boring or not good enough, or that anything that he's going to go out and say, my apologies, it wouldn't be boring or not good enough, because that would be in the self as context process. What he might think is that anything he says might not be received well, that he's not a member that fits in. If he says something, it might be taken poorly and might be embarrassing for him. And so on that basis, he doesn't go out and contribute. You'll see that there's self as context here that I almost fumbled on a moment ago. That is any thoughts or this conceptualized self about who he is. If this young boy goes out and believes that he is boring, that he's not good enough, we would go out and appreciate that as being a very heavy load, and so we'd want to decouple from that conceptualized self. He certainly wouldn't be in the present moment. The good chance that he'd be monitoring himself in an unhelpful way and kind of fearful of what repercussions might come of this social situation in the future, and so on. His values would probably be not clarified at that point, because there would be confusion, panic, worry, and the like. So rather than being very solid in, I want to connect and I want to contribute and this is how I want to do so, maybe being patient or having courage, he might become afraid and become avoidant. And that's where, rather than committed action occurring, he would become inactive or avoidant. And so what we can see is that when we're doing one process, we're likely to be doing another. Let me explain that. To go out and accept how that situation is, this young man might need to go out and kind of look inside and notice that his heart is beating, he might have pressure on his chest, movement in his stomach, he might feel awkward, dry in the mouth, and the like. Now, to be able to do that, you would almost certainly need to be in the present moment. A non-judgmental perspective of sitting there, standing there, and observing. To then go out and diffuse, for example, going out and recognising these thoughts and saying, thank you, mind, or I'm having the thought that whatever I'm going to say would be taken as boring. To be able to go out and do that, once again, he will need to go out and be connected, grounded. He might go out and on that basis want to commit to saying something, but in wanting to go out and contribute, wanting to say something, wanting to maybe have a joke himself, once again, his feelings would become heightened, and he might notice his chest starting to tighten again. Having said that, to commit to that action, he might draw back into his values and kind of consider that he wants to be a part of the group, and in some sense the type of friend he wants to be is one that's involved, available, caring, humorous, and the like. And so there's values, those values are there. And so you can see that All of these processes are working together, and by going out and contributing in that social situation, he's developing that psychological flexibility that would live here in the centre. The alternative is, in wanting to go out and commit to action to say something, he tightens up and feels uncomfortable, and so rather than going out and contributing, he goes out and avoids, he forgets his values. He's certainly not in the present moment. In actual fact, he feels a little bit unbalanced at the time, caught up in either the past or the future. He's very much fused with thoughts about how the world is and whether he can contribute or not. And there's another identity or a reinforcement in his identity that self as context is reverting back to self as content. He sees himself as this conceptualized story about him. So that's the framework, that's the 6 core processes. So when you're going through the training and each of the videos.
So the aim, the goal that's been specified here is psychological flexibility. I'm not sure that it's the best goal or the most relevant goal, and I'm going to try and explain why as we go through this. But that doesn't mean that I don't think that the therapy and the ACT is good. So first I want to talk about my experience. I learned about it during Thursday's talk. That was me learning. And I didn't know what I thought about it. I had been looking at, or wanting to look at as well, some cognitive behavioural therapy. And I thought maybe that cognitive behavioural therapy was better for a lay person with mental health issues who has no interest in spirituality, who just has an issue and wants to target that single issue. And I believe that when you do cognitive behavioural therapy, you have to be mindful of yourself. You have to be kind of in the present moment to see what's going on inside yourself. So that it doesn't need to be kind of artificially put in. It's just they are functions of the human body and mind. And the challenge, the task of looking at what's going on inside in cognitive behavioural therapy just innately includes present moment and mindfulness. So I looked at, I was looking at a few books and sources, and the overlap was big. So I was thinking, where does ACT come in? Where is that process of identifying the troubling thoughts or feelings, and then kind of the rewiring, the reconditioning of perhaps exposure? Because the cognitive behavioural therapy that I did for myself was to do with social phobia, and it included some exposure to what I was afraid of, that I was in control of, and I could choose how close I got to said scary situation, and slowly increase it. So exposure therapy and cognitive behavioural therapy, I hear, are different, or different arms of the same thing. I'm not sure. I'm not a professional. Just exploring tools that could help me. So I wasn't really too impressed with ACT at that point. And then I sat down to meditate the next day, and I just thought to myself, why not bring in those steps from ACT? So I hope you guys can see my mouse here on the screen, because I'm going to use it as a pointer. So what I did when I sat down was I looked at when I was in meditation, I looked at the first point of experiential acceptance, and I thought to myself, well, yes, meditation-wise, before this I'd been following Ajahn Brahm's guided meditations in the 4 foundations of mindfulness, which is starting the body, then move to feelings, then move to mind, and then very deep stuff after that, which I never get to. So instead I thought, why don't I start with acceptance? that seems to make a massive amount of sense, to start with the acceptance of how things are right now, the thoughts, the feelings, the sensations in all of the senses of the body, the sounds, I tend to have my eyes closed, but the sights as well, smell, any pains in the body, all that kind of stuff. So start with acceptance, which brought me to the present moment, at least as close as I could get at that time before meditating further, because as one gets closer, the more one stills oneself and relaxes. But I was as close as I could be right at the beginning. And then I sat there for a small while, and a thought came up. And it just so happened that I had been reading about cognitive behavioral therapy that day from the perspective of intrusive thoughts. And a thought came in, and I just thought, as a response to it, rather than getting caught up with it, I was going in my mind, let's go to the next step on ACT, the diffusion, cognitive diffusion, and to take that step back and think, I'm having a thought. But it just so happened that I just instinctively thought, I didn't invite this thought in. This thought is trying to distract me, and that makes it intrusive. I don't want to get caught up in this thought. So there was the diffusion, and I noticed then that I must be in the present moment. And then I said, right, with the diffusion happened, being in the present moment, with the acceptance happened, can I witness that this thought is playing out on the screen of some kind of consciousness or awareness? Like there is a fundamental, I had to be aware of it. And this was partly influenced, this particular last bit of see it on the screen. So he spoke, I forget his name, but in this video, earlier in this video, he spoke of seeing these things play out like they're the canvas, seeing the canvas that everything plays out on. So the content then would be the painting, and say it's a painting of a scary monster, it would be the same as having a thought of a scary monster, and then the stepping back is seeing and identifying with the canvas behind the painting of the scary monster. It's just painting. It's where I am. I'm not either the scary monster or being chased by the scary monster or hounded by the scary monster. The scary monster is not real. I identify with the canvas. So these four here could literally be used as like a meditation map almost. So why would I want to see these things as a canvas? Like I said in this video, because I have spoken an awful lot about Buddhism. This first video, part 1, was about Buddhism. When I practiced a lot, I had breakthroughs years ago, which I aspire to achieve again. Not that it's an achievement, but I want to see things the way I used to see them when I practiced a lot, because I was much happier at that time. But the funny thing is that Buddhism doesn't actually point and highlight that stuff. And it talks a lot about suffering, and I think I've over-focused on suffering. And one of the things which is helping me move away from that is the video that I did on a few Thursdays ago about Buddhism versus yoga. The person who made that on that channel, let's swip over here now. He is from a Hindu tradition. So the person who was doing ACT, is Nesh Nikolic, was the one who said about it being like on a canvas. And the video about the 8 limbs of yoga was by Swami Tadat Mananda, who has also done things about Advaita Vedanta, which is a school in Hinduism. So I happened to see this video, and this is the main bulk of what we're going to look at today, which is from that perspective of Advaita Vedanta, Hinduism, school in Hinduism. Like I said, I'm definitely not highly educated. I'm learning about this on the fly with you guys. In fact, many of you guys might know an awful lot more about this. It would not be hard. So, the video that we're going to watch next is by a man called Rupert Spira. And just quickly, for the sake of orientation and referencing our sources, I know Wikipedia isn't the best source, but it is better than nothing. I don't know why anyone would particularly lie about this. He talks a lot about non-duality, Advaita. I think the V is pronounced like a W actually, Advaita Vedanta. So this is where this teaching's coming from, and I think it's super important to know our sources and know what we've been instructed, because quite often, particularly spiritual teachings, can all sound kind of similar, but they can actually be really emphasizing different things and have different paths, and to mix and match can become confusing and blur the main impetus. And I realise that's a hypocritical thing to say, because I'm doing that now. But following the Buddhist teachings, I've become somewhat stuck, and I know what my goal is, to kind of experience the contentment that I felt from feeling like everything I was experiencing was playing out. In my mind, I conceptualized it like a window, like the senses were windows out into the world, and all these different things arose. They came, things came from behind the wall, and they were on through the window. I could see them, and then they went, and I couldn't see them anymore. Like sitting on a train and seeing the countryside whiz past. There's no point trying to hold on to or identify with anything that's the other side of that window, because it's all changing so rapidly. And I did the first time see it by getting into deep meditation and seeing, not deep meditation, but my breath, and starting to see the gap in the breath. This is Anapanasati. And then the gap grew, and I became very aware of things arising and passing. But right now, there's some reason, something blocking me getting back there, and yoga is helping me stretch. Obviously, my physio is really helping with my posture. I get a lot of pain in the body. I think there's some kind of I don't want to say it's like trauma stuck in the muscles, but I think a lot of people would explain it that way. But there's reactions and things going on inside me which is knocking me off center. And I think the most important thing, the reason why I'm saying this, is finding the right tool for the job. And that's what we're doing here. We're looking at different tools, because different people are in different places with different challenges, and they're different people. So by looking at these different tools, we can find things that might help us, that we can try. And The proof is in the pudding, is in trying it. That's a very important thing to say as we sit here and we look and explore these things, is that just sitting here and talking about them isn't going to do anything. We'd sit here and talk about them to discover things which might help, the things that we might decide, oh yeah, well, I'll give that a go, you know, try it for ourselves and see if it helps. That said, we're going to jump into this video of Rupert Spira and see how much in common it has with what we've just learned from about the ACT therapy and its goal.
I was hoping you could help me with creation and non-causality. Is that how you say it? So I've been reading about gradual creation, Big Bang, birth, death, instantaneous creation, which is I see it, I exist it, like with the eye arises the object, and then non-causality, which is no creation because only the self exists. So if I do what you were just talking about, of eliminating, looking at what's essential, like I would lose the two creations and I would just be left with non-causality. It feels like the umbrella truth. But what happens to the other two? Because if everything is included and indivisible with the absolute, how could you say that they don't exist?
How could you say that?
How can you say that anything that's included in reality doesn't exist?
Did I say that?
No, but I'm wondering about the two creations because...
Tell me, describe the two creations again.
Well, gradual creation would be cause and effect,
yes.
Birth and death, Big Bang. So it's existence as we know it without understanding. And instantaneous creation is more like I see it, I exist it. I mean, with the eye, it's like insta-duality. It's sort of how I see it. Insta ignorance, even depending on how you see it. But
so let's say you have a dream, and you in your dream you go on a family holiday for 3 months, and you take a road trip across America. So in your dream, the dream takes 3 months, and how wide is America? 3,000 miles, and you travel a distance of 3,000 miles in your dream. So then you wake up, and you look at your clock, and you realize you fell asleep for 30 seconds. So how long did your dream take, and how much space did it take up? How long did the journey take, and how much distance was traveled?
I want to say none, but...
Well, it depends which point of view you take. If you take the point of view of the character in the dream, it took 3 months, and you covered 3,000 miles. If you take the point of view of the dreamer, the dream didn't take up any space in your mind, and it didn't have any duration. So this absence of space and absence of duration is what's called eternity or infinity. Eternal, infinite awareness. But modulated through the mind of the dreamed character. The eternal, infinite nature of your mind appeared as time and space. In other words, the mind of the dreamed character, the character in the dream, refracted the eternal, infinite nature of consciousness and made it appear as time and space. So from the point of view of the character, all kinds of things happened in those 3 months, one leading on from the other. So cause and effect was real, or is real from the perspective of the character in the dream. And the laws of cause and effect work in the dream. But from the point of view of the dreamer, that those laws, the laws of cause and effect and time and space, they don't exist for the dreamer in the way that they do for the dreamed character. Now, the dreamer is consciousness, the dreamed character is each of us.
So can you say they coexist?
So, as we saw, Rupert Spira is talking very much from the perspective of spirituality, and I don't think it's a large leap to suggest he's talking about awakening. He's talking about non-duality, and I think that I've heard him say that he terms that as awakening. Don't take my word for it. And here, so far, he's talking about the different perspectives that we can take. But so far, we can see a large contrast between ACT therapy and what is being presented here. The question is the world an illusion? That the ladies presented and asked Rupert Spira to respond to. Why I'm showing you this will make more sense shortly. But so far we can see quite a large contrast between the goal in ACT therapy of psychological flexibility for the sake of, you could say, good mental health, I suppose, but also the person who went to the therapy would have done so because they had a specific issue that they wanted to address. The committed action part of it really suggests to me that they're not doing something that they either want to be doing or should be doing. In my case with social phobias, well, let's use the case used in the example that we've just watched, where someone wanted to go out and socialise and was too afraid to do so because of anxiety, because of social phobia issues. And if they did make themselves go, they might not have contributed because they were kind of overwhelmed or identifying with and sucked into their own internal story, I suppose. So that has a very practical, obvious application for a mental health issue that some people might face. It seems to make a lot more sense. And psychological flexibility in the face of that seems to make a lot more pragmatic, grounded sense than awakening or enlightenment, particularly for people who aren't interested in spirituality. So let's carry on and listen to a further more description here in answer to this question and see how they might overlap.
Even though one is more ultimately true?
Well, you can't say that they coexist because there are not really two things there. One is simply a limited version of the other. Time and space is a limited version of eternity. It's not as if there are two things. You can't say that King Lear and John Smith coexist. For them to coexist, there'd have to be two people. They don't coexist because there's only one person there to begin with. So there is only eternal infinite awareness, which appears as time and space when refracted through the prism of the mind.
But the laws that govern time and space are still included in ultimate reality.
Absolutely.
So they are real, just not in the way that we think.
Absolutely, yes. Everything is real. There's no such thing as a... Everything is real. Even if you have a dream at night, your dream is a real dream. It's not a real Caribbean beach. The Caribbean beach is not really there. But nevertheless, it is a real dream. When you look at a mirage in a desert. There's no real water there, but nevertheless there is a reality to the apparent water. It is a play of light, relatively speaking. When you look at a landscape in a movie, the landscape is an illusion. It's not really there. But nevertheless, there is something that is real about it, the TV screen. This confusion, I think, comes because we often hear in the traditional teaching that the world is an illusion, or the world is not real.
Doesn't exist.
That it doesn't exist. I struggled with this, or thought about this for many years, and it's because in the traditional teaching, very often a clear distinction is not made between that which is non-existent and that which is an illusion. The two ideas are conflated. They're considered to be the same. So sometimes we hear the world is not real, it doesn't exist, and another time we hear it is an illusion, and they are understood to mean the same thing. No, they're different. There is a difference between something that is an illusion and something that doesn't exist. So let me explain the difference. Something that doesn't exist, something that is, let's start with an illusion. Something that is an illusion is something that is there, but it's not what it appears to be. So the mirage in the desert, the landscape in the movie, there is something there. When we're watching a movie, we're watching a conventional movie now. We're sitting on our sofa. We're watching the landscape. There is something there, but it's not what it appears to be. It's not a real landscape, but it is, relatively speaking, a real screen. So the screen is the reality of the illusory landscape. And in fact, all there is to the illusory landscape is the real screen. So all we're really seeing is its reality, is what is real. There's nothing unreal there. It's just that what is there is not what it appears to be. Are you with me?
I am, and I think
So the question and the way that it's being answered are slightly out of context to, quite a lot out of context to how we're approaching it. But what he's explaining there with the landscape on the screen in a movie, the landscape is there, but really, for example, if it's on a telly screen, it's just small coloured lights which are switched on in such a pattern as it looks like a landscape. The camera would have filmed a landscape, but the memory was how the colour looked, and it just shines out the same colours on the screen. It's not, you're not really looking at the landscape. So there's an illusion there. And how this overlaps with ACT is in the steps of diffusion. So in the example that was just given in that ACT video, the lad had the thought, I am boring. And the diffusion part of that, of the ACT therapy, was to step away from the thought and see, I'm having a thought. I'm having the thought that I'm boring. So if one believes that my choice and decision and perception and conclusions in my thoughts are real, then one believes if the thought comes up, I am boring, they conclude that that must mean they really are boring. Whereas when you step away from it with diffusion, you see that it's just a thought. There's a thought there that's suggesting the content of the thought is I am boring. But if you don't speak English, then the content of the thought "I am boring" is not understood. It's just some sounds. If it was said in a different language that you don't speak, it wouldn't have any substance. It would just be a series of sounds. So there's something of an illusion in that thought, that it doesn't mean what people might think it means. And obviously this therapy is going to naturally be directed. The people who would ask for this kind of therapy would be the type of people who do believe that. And I think that there are plenty of people out there who don't necessarily believe those thoughts. And so they don't have the same kind of mental health issues without necessarily being awakened or enlightened or whatever, spirituality wise. The next step, the next big step within the ACT, so you'd be in the present moment already, you'd already be accepting. To be able to witness the thought, you must be in the present moment, or at least close, because the thought comes up and then I'm witnessing the thought is a small delay. Particularly if you think I am witnessing a thought, then that is secondary. The present moment then is I am thinking that I am witnessing, and so on and so on. If you identify with the content of that thought, like we said, when we're now on the self as context step, if you identify with the content of that thought, then you conclude I must actually be boring. And if you conclude that if you identify with the being that is aware of thoughts, which is the same as saying like the identifying with the screen in terms of the time and space or consciousness or awareness or however you want to put it, that has the capacity to think, and you just stay with I'm aware of thoughts and I'm identifying with that thing that's aware, that's an observer to the thoughts, then you don't need to conclude that you are boring. You can just conclude that thoughts are coming up and it doesn't matter what's in them. So let's let this video play a bit further, and we'll then talk a bit more maybe about comparing the goals and what this tool really is, what's really being taught here in both ACT and by Rupert Spira here.
I have the most trouble with it when I put it into the context of, say, the Big Bang.
I'm just trying to make clear the difference between an illusion and something that doesn't exist. So something that doesn't exist would be a square circle. Mm-hmm. Have any of you, or can any of you now, imagine a square circle? So a square circle is not even something that exists, but is not what it appears to be. It is utterly non-existent. It is not an illusion. An illusion is something that is there, but that is not what it appears to be. The square circle is never even there. We cannot even visualize it. So, the world is not non-existent. It is real. This experience is undeniably real, and all experience, even a dream or a vision or a hallucination or a near-death experience, or all experience is real. But not all experience is what it appears to be. So this experience of the room, or let's call it the world, is real. But the question is, what is real about it? What is its reality? And if we investigate its reality, we don't find stuff called matter, we find stuff called consciousness.
So in Buddhism, when we compared it with ACT in the last video, in part 1, I said that it would appear that Buddhism casts a wider net. And in that wider net, it would have included, so ACT casts the net to thoughts and feelings with the diffusion of from thoughts and feelings. Whereas in Buddhism, it included all of the five senses, the body, and the will. That net gets cast, and more. It gets cast right across everything, the functions of the mind, right down to phenomena, seeing phenomena arise and pass. And then they're all explored in this same way. So if you were to bring in the acts self as context point, or step, or stage, or whatever you want to call it, where would that be? What is that insinuating if the net is cast that wide? And here Rupert Spira is talking about being in a room and thinking that the room appears as a room and that being an illusion. It feels to me like the things that have been highlighted in ACT are the tools, the steps needed to do this, but the net's not cast so wide, perhaps. I'm learning just like yourselves.
But it doesn't make the matter go away.
The matter was never there in the first place.
That's where I get.
The matter is the illusion. Matter is the appearance. Seeing the screen, that is the reality of the landscape, doesn't make the landscape go away, because there was no landscape there to begin with. All there was to the landscape was the screen. So we can still see the appearance of the landscape, but know that it is a screen. In other words, it is ignorance that disappears, not Maya. Maya, in this context, is the illusion. It's not Maya that disappears, it's ignorance that disappears.
So you know it for what it really is, and you just see the screen.
Yes, you still watch the movie, like the example I gave this morning. Most people, when they watch a movie, they just see the contents of the movie. When Ramana Maharshi and the Buddha watch the movie, they still see the contents of the movie, but all they see is the screen. They watch the same movie, but they see its reality. They don't allow the content of the movie to obscure its reality.
So what I don't understand, and my critique of ACT and its specified goal, is how the instructions can tell us to diffuse from thoughts and feelings, to contextualize ourself as the screen upon which thoughts and feelings arise on, and yet limit that, or suggest it's limited to not including the body and the senses, for example, as a what is step one really in the foundations of mindfulness, which is Buddhism, one of the steps in the Eightfold Path. It seems to me that there is I don't know this to be true, absolutely, but there seems like there could be a small risk, and the word risk suggests that it could be come with negative consequences, which I'm not really sure that that's appropriate, but that one could do this type of therapy for the sake of addressing, for example, a social phobia, and then think that they're using these tools to achieve psychological flexibility, or to fix their social phobia. So that's the goal in their mind, but then they start practicing something which is in line with an end goal of awakening. And the path of awakening is not always an easy one, and having good access to teachers, I think, can really help. And I say that as someone that's never had constant good access to teachers and has suffered the consequences of that. When I have decided to ignore parts or try and walk away from it and forget what what I've witnessed, it never went well. And if I'd had a trusted friend that could say, look, this is what you're experiencing is normal, the discomfort of the sense of self being challenged is normal, and it's like an integration process. Don't fight it. That's all I needed to hear, really, is don't fight it. But, whether you could consider that a risk, because there are plenty of people in the world who would deeply, deeply love to experience some kind of awakening or enlightenment and put massive amounts of time and energy into it and don't. So if someone were to accidentally start to experience awakening or enlightenment from a therapy, you couldn't really I think they'd be a bit upset to for someone to moan about it. But it does bring into question the aim.
People like Ramana Maharshi and the Buddha, these were not people who had extraordinary experiences. Their experiences were the same as our experiences, just this ordinary experience. But they didn't allow the objective qualities of experience to veil or obscure the reality of experience. They saw, as it were, through the illusion. Although it's not through it, you don't see through the landscape to see the screen, but you understand what I mean. They saw, as it were, through the illusion to the reality. They didn't allow the appearance of things to veil their reality.
It's just so mind-boggling. I mean, it feels, when I understand it, it feels true. And when I read quotes like there is no creation, there is no dissolution, there is no seeker, it just feels, intuitively, it feels so right. It's such a relief to read that.
Yes, you see, that is written from the point of view of awareness. That text is awareness speaking. Now remember, awareness is the self-aware, dimensionless screen, but let's say it's the vast screen upon which all the colors of experience are playing. Now, from the point of the screen, nothing other than the screen ever comes into existence. Yes, from the screen's point of view, there is just itself, modulating itself, coloring itself in all the forms of experience. But no thing, no separate object comes into existence. Existence from ex sistere in Latin, meaning to stand out from. To one watching the movie on the sofa, it seems that the people and the trees stand out from the screen and have their own independent existence. But from the point of view of the screen, if not from the point of view of one watching the movie, but from the point of view of the screen, if the screen were watching the movie, no person or tree or object would stand out from itself and with its own independent existence. It experiences everything as a play of itself. And that's what it means when we hear nothing exists. It doesn't mean that there is no experience. It means no thing, no independently existing thing stands out from awareness with its own being. The only being there is, the isness of all things, is the screen of awareness. From that one's point of view, there is no creation in the sense that there are no created things. There is just the dimensionless screen of awareness modulating itself in all the forms of experience. Nothing is created. No thing comes into existence. That's why it says in the Bhagavad Gita, that which is never ceases to be. That which is not never comes into existence. But these statements, when they're taken out of context, or when they don't come with an accompanying...
So he's addressing, going back to the question of what's real or not there. So I'll interject, because what he said there is really highlighting the point that ACT is bringing in diffusion and self as context away from the content of thoughts and feelings to the screen, and yet leaving everything else. So everything else apparently is real, but then one identifies only with everything that's not thoughts and feelings. I think it. I personally have the goal of witnessing the illusion. I have the goal of wanting to see things as they really are. So for me, ACT is a really good tool. At the moment, is proving to be excellent for getting into meditation and for pointing right at the illusion in a way that Buddhism doesn't do. And I believe that this comes primarily from these kinds of teachings in Hinduism, which is an amalgamation of different schools, including yoga. Why don't we switch screen? And now have a think about those, a review and a think about those fundamental questions posed here, which was good mental health versus awakening. I am still none the wiser on what good mental health is, because if bad mental health is having the thoughts, lacking courage and okay, here's an idea. If bad mental health, in the example given when we watched the ACT video at the beginning, is having a social anxiety, believing oneself to be boring, and because of that, then not going out and socializing as that person wants to and is healthy to. It's not healthy to not engage in the world because one believes oneself as incapable or not worthy. I've been there in that kind of sphere, and it's a bad place to be. So say one, in basic CBT, it would be to identify just those beliefs and then prove that those beliefs are inaccurate and thus wire new beliefs. So you're not at any point questioning your identity of yourself, although you question the belief is a foundation of the identity, in fairness. With a new belief, then that has changed the picture of who one is. So if that person thinks, well, I'm boring, and then the belief is identified within cognitive behavioral therapy, it's challenged. It's like, are you really boring? Is the content of that thought accurate? Although it doesn't at any point talk about the fact that it's that you are just the screen. It talks about the fact that you can observe the thought and challenge the thought. That is just a thought. And then you can go out and form a new belief of like, actually, no, I'm not boring. I can socialize. I can make people laugh and have good friendships and things. And then form the new belief that I am capable, or, you know, I get on better with these types of people than those types of people. So when I go out with the people that I don't get on with so well, the conversation doesn't flow as well. There's some awkwardness, but it's not all me. It's because me and these people are different, and the awkwardness, the stuttered conversation is just a consequence of people who are different trying to socialize, and you stick. Then you go, it's not a self-blame thing. It's not something to be afraid of. It's something to be countered with the skill of small talk, of not trying to force what's not natural, and not expecting from the people you don't get on well with the kinds of things and the rewards from quality relationships that you get from the people that you do get on with. There's no need to challenge the fundamental sense of self there, or bring in consciousness or any of that stuff. Actually, the more I talk about this, the more I think that people who are not spiritually inclined are much better off with cognitive behavioural therapy. Regular, I believe what's referred to as wave 2 cognitive behavioural therapy. But those who are spiritually inclined, who have an end goal. So if the goal was the good mental health, it was to reform beliefs, challenge beliefs, you could do regular cognitive behavioural therapy, but you could, I presume, I'm guessing, take up the ACT therapy, identify as the wider consciousness in relation to the thoughts and feelings that are troubling, that have driven the person to go to the counsellor, and then choose the values must be in conflict with what the person's doing. They must value relationship and yet be too afraid for their own social phobia reasons to go out and relate with others. So the value means you should do something, not do what you have been doing. I suppose it's a change of behaviour, which is what all of this stuff is in. That's the behavioural sciences that sit behind them all. I just don't think that you need to bring in the questioning of the self. If the key is they're asking you to pick up a tool which can break down, it's a hammer so fucking big it can smash everything, the sense of self, the sense of everything outside the entire universe. It's a fucking massive hammer, and they're asking you to use that to break apart a little thought. And you can break apart your little thoughts and feelings and beliefs. I mean, it sounds hard. I mean, people think, well, you can change your beliefs and sense of self. But you can do that quite easily by just challenging it, which is what, a part of cognitive behavioural therapy. I do think that there's a little bit of a mismatch there, but if you are the type of person that's interested in spirituality, in questioning the self and asking the big questions, about what's really going on here, what is life really about, in that case, and it's possibly those people who would be most inclined to come across ACT, because like I said, I haven't seen it as an option for me in the health services in my country. And I think that it's just because they stick to what has been proven, tried and trusted, and more traditional things, whereas for people who have the money to be able to go private, combined with a pre-existing interest and inclination towards mindfulness and spirituality, then they might lean towards that. But like I said, the thing by far that I'm most impressed with ACT is the ability to be honest, to somewhat drop values and committed action. But values and committed action could be having the goal of challenging the sense of self. Although they said values and goals are different, although committed action would be, that's not an action, you see, that kind of a goal. And it certainly hasn't got a time frame. But whatever the motivator was to do the meditation, to do the yoga, to do whatever kind of spiritual practice it is, whatever that motivation is, it could be covered by those bits on the right of the hexaflex that we saw, of the values and the committed action. And then the first four used as a more focused framework for the purposes of diffusion from everything that comes in through the senses and thoughts and feelings, and a reminder, kind of like a mantra, that we should question what we identify with, and look to, constant pointer to look to the screen, to not just assume the reality of what's appearing before us. In Buddhism, that could be reminder to wait because it's about to pass, and when it passes, witnessing the absence of it and thus highlighting the screen that way. But you need to be really still, because you do need to be really still to do that. But setting the seed of some kind of at least intellectual understanding of the fact that things are coming and going on the other side of the senses, including the sense of mind and hence thoughts and feelings, I suppose, would probably feeling in terms of I like or don't like, as opposed to sensations in the body anyway. So we're coming to the end there. I hope that you've enjoyed this talk today, this comparison. As ever, I always say this, I thought it was really interesting, even if nobody else did. This is all new to me. I mean, plenty of people who are, I don't need these on now, plenty of people who are therapists, psychologists, people who have got a long-term practice of spirituality may well know all of this anyway, but for me, these are like breakthrough kind of paradigm discoveries of how things are, what this stuff all is, what the goals are, and how the goals kind of relate. Because the goal of good mental health then maybe, well, I don't know that we've really totally covered that. Good mental health being that belief system, a belief system that doesn't cause mental health problems, just the absence of mental health problems. So it doesn't necessarily mean happiness, but it just means you can go to a pub and talk to people without freaking out. And I don't say that disrespectfully to people who have got those social phobias, because I've been there. But when I say freaking out, I mean like triggering fight or flight or freeze, fight, flight or freeze response, the panic attack, the sweating, the you know, all of those kinds of things, and I'm just perhaps slightly disrespectfully summing them up as freaking out. But the interesting thing is, for someone, for me at least, who got to the point of having social phobias and knowing that I needed to do something, was that I didn't panic. I didn't think it was scary. But my body did. My body freaked out. And my mind was like, what are you doing? But there were thoughts in there. When I did the cognitive behavioural therapy, I found them, but it was really frustrating. Why is my body doing this? So there was a shift of context in terms of how I self-identified. But that's not a good place to be in when you think I'm not the body and I hate the body. The body doesn't do what I tell it. That is not a good place to be. Or is it thinking, the body's out to get me, is almost personifying it as something which is deliberately trying to make my life worse, or ruining my life. If it wasn't for my body reacting this way, then I would be super happy. Oh, you've had ACT. How did you find it? Be very interested to know. I've not spoken to anyone who's actually done it. It's new to me. I have done cognitive behavioural therapy. Okay. And how did it go? If you have the time and you're comfortable saying, two really short questions are, how did it go? Did it help with the issues that you were facing? And two, did it bring into your mind any kind of spiritual addiction free? Congratulations, that is awesome news. Very happy for you. That's awesome. And there you go. And yeah, second question, are you spiritually inclined? Did it bring in any bigger questions about how you perceive the world and who you are in your experience? Did it bring in any kind of bigger things into play, or were they already there? Or because I'm wondering if ACT is a bit heavy-handed almost. It helped especially with bearing the weight of life without you. Right. There's an awful lot of stuff about this. Agnostic. Agnostic is a word I struggle remembering what it means. That means you believe that there is something, but you just don't want to label it. Is that right? There's a lot more to that word, isn't there? And I watched a video about it and I thought that it was really interesting, but the things it brought up were so on the edge of my ability to comprehend that it's gone again. The information went in and then it shot straight out the other side. Oh dear. But that's awesome, there we go. What a great way to end the video is Jem Burt jumping in there and kindly letting us know that it worked.